So it is with retrospective cohort study. This means we review the case file, review the medical chart. Start from the beginning, we work with the medical profession in the emergency department to work with them to try to check the data system in the hospital, and then to find out how many cases is domestic violence cases, and then to retrieve all the medical chart of A&E department, and then review the details about what happened, because this medical chart is keep a record by the doctor and also the nurse in the process of handling this case. So in these 2 years and 5 months, in this period of time, we find 372 cases, including 54 men and 380 female cases. Okay. The first thing is the location. I would like to share more that for what reason. Actually, this is a hospital in Hong Kong. This is 2 regional hospitals in Two Moon Hospital and Port Point Hospital. Maybe share to some background for these 2 hospitals, because these 2 hospitals in Hong Kong is a West News Territory. Yes, it's a West. It's a East. Yes. Again, the mix. Yes, it's the West News Territories in Hong Kong. Actually, in this district, it's very different to this district, because in this West News Territories in district is very near to the mainland China, and also in this district, a huge number is a public housing estate. So in other words, this is in this district is, we say that a large number of the population, they are from low-income families. And according to the Social Welfare Department, the newly spousal abuse cases record, around 20% or over 20% cases come from this district. So this is one of the districts we call this is a high-risk district in IPV, because most cases come from this district. So this is the reason why we try to connect with these 2 hospitals to find out this the IPV case. Another reason to approach to work with these 2 hospitals is I think that actually I'm not sure whether here is any medical profession here, but it's very easy to understand. In A&E department, it's very, very busy, especially in the Two Moon Hospital in this district. Every day there were over 600 to 700 cases. 600 and 700 cases in one day. Sometimes they will say that in the public holiday, there were over 1,000 cases per day. So this is impossible, right? So, but for what reason they willing for us is just a social worker, or now is working in a university to do research, to collaborate with them to work that. I think it's very lucky that, because I think more than 10 years before, maybe 2002 or 2001, that actually one NGO in Hong Kong working on domestic violence has a co-relationship with working relationship with the Two Moon Hospital, starting a crisis intervention team on domestic violence. In this period of time, because it's important that the service in charge, they also find that, I think not just only the service in charge, but also the nurse and also the doctors find that, because they handle a lot of the domestic violence case. They, according to their impression, I think they will say that every day at least 1 to 3 cases they will handle is a domestic violence case. So this is the reason why they're willing to find out to want to do something for the case. So it's over 10 years before, one NGO approached to this hospital, because in this time, Port Oil Hospital still have A&E department 10 years before. And then the NGO to provide some this is a kind of office hour service. That means after office hour, they still provide the outreach service to support this hospital to do some outreach service on handling the domestic violence case. This is a pilot project, but very sad that because of funding issue, now they cannot continue the service. But because I think this is a kind of sit here that's to make the doctor and the nurse, they have awareness about this. And also they do a lot of some protocol. They have a screening sheet, because it is start from this period of time, 10 years before. They design a screening sheet to help the doctor and the nurse to screen out which cases is IPV. And also in this period of time, they provide some training course for the doctor and nurse. So this is a reason why maybe this is a problem, a lot of these IPV cases in this district. But maybe this is also because through the training, enhanced awareness of the doctor and the nurse, they're willing to ask the patient, they come here, for what reason you are injured? This is a so they have a protocol how to handling the domestic violence case. At first, they will have a mindset, they will separate the victim and the perpetrator. And also because every A&E department is a public hospital, still have a police station here. So they will collaborate with the police. One, the police tries to keep the perpetrator, and on the other side, the nurse and the doctors will try to talk with the victim. And also through the training and the collaboration, but we understand the doctor and the nurse is impossible to spend a lot of time to talk, to share and listening. Impossible in A&E, okay? Especially, I'm not sure, maybe it's in Hong Kong, in Tuen Mun Hospital especially. So they're willing to arrange a kind of a private area or a room or a corner to give a phone to the victim to make a phone call. It's a hotline to the NGO. Actually, because it's just only make some special arrangement. The doctor and the nurse no need to listen and speak and spend the time for this patient. But they will encourage the patient to make a phone call to the NGO, is because as a number of a hotline, they have some health card, and ask the patient to make a phone call to contact with the NGO to know more about the service before the victim is transferred to go back to home. Okay, so this is another reason that I try to approach this hospital to conduct this study. And they're willing to work with me because I think that is not easy, because I asked to which all the A&E, the medical chart for me to review. Actually, it's not easy because it's a handwriting by doctor. It's just like a graph, it's not a wording. But in this process, it's very important that because in another partner in this study, I have a nursing department, Janet. Dr. Janet Wong is one of the research partners. They just help together to try to review this medical chart. So further, this study, we find this injury location is very interesting because a number of research conduct for the women, we find that head, leg, face is very common location. But for the men, it's not much research on that. One research also find that maybe this is a common location we'll find is the upper limb. But in my research, in my study, this data, my data just only 2 years and 5 months only. I hope that I will calculate, I will analyze the whole 5-year data, make it more accurate. But in this interval, this data just 54 men, we find that upper limb and also head, leg, face also common. We find that maybe this is because the women, if we're talking about the fight together, right? Or maybe this is abused by the women. But the women, the body size is smaller than the man. It's a very easy to use a weapon. Use a weapon is easy to fight, to hit. It's the upper limb and also the head, leg, face. So this is the reason why the injury location in this area. And the causes of the injury was what happened. And this is very common. It's attracted by the weapon. The weapon is including the knife. It's a very dangerous weapon. But because in Hong Kong, the no gun, so life is a very serious one. And then another thing that we find that they are injury. Another thing is very interesting. Actually, we will find the men most likely will have a certain extent is open wound, so they will likely will receive a dressing treatment, some abrasion and or cutting caused by the sharp or point object. Another thing is a human bite. It's also very common causes of the injury. And also, this is very easy to understand. When the woman cannot get any weapon, any object, the very easy weapon is your teeth, just bite him, just to keep her safe. And for the females, it's different. Most likely, they're not much wound, but a lot of tenderness, bruise. This is caused by blunt trauma, maybe just by fate or just only punch. So this is the reason. There's a different kind of causes and the different kinds of wound or injury. So the social background of the man and the woman, again, for the man, is very different to the women. We find that the man is more likely is a majority. Most of them is a Chinese, and also living in Hong Kong more than 7 years, or maybe both is a local Hong Kong people. But for the female, comparing with the female victim, actually the female victim most likely they are come from the new immigrant, maybe from mainland China. It's a new immigrant. Some of them, they just only have a two-way permit. Another way, two-way permit in Hong Kong, that means they're not a resident in Hong Kong, just a visitor, come from mainland China. They can stay here just only 3 months. It's a very common because a lot of the local Chinese men go back to mainland China to get married. And then they will need to make the application. The women go to Hong Kong for family reunion. But in this period of time, in the process of making application to stay in Hong Kong, the women can apply the visiting visa, but just only 3 months. We will call this kind of visa is a two-way permit, but the women cannot enjoy any welfare in Hong Kong. So it's a total different situation. And the help-seeking pattern is the man. It's very interesting. Even the doctor and the nurse introduce a lot of social worker, medical social worker, crisis social worker, hotline. Most men, they will reject, they don't need social worker. Comparing with the women willing to talk, willing to seek help. But the men, first thing, maybe because most likely this IPV happened is after midnight. Maybe has not on-site social work service, just only hotline, because actually the hotline is a 24-hour. But the men are not willing to talk with the hotline, comparing with the women. Because in the same time, the doctor and the nurse, they will suggest, encourage the both party, the woman or man, whether they were willing to receive the service from medical social worker. But the medical social worker just only provide the service in office hour, 9 to 5. Or maybe some days they have extended services, 9 to 7 only. But after the office hour, they have not any on-site social work service. But actually, for most of the IPV cases occurred after dinner time, or after dinner time, or maybe midnight. I think because so there's a reason why when they admitted in the hospital, it's around midnight or after midnight. In this period of time, no on-site social work, just only doctor, nurse, and police. And then in this time, you advise the client willing to receive the counseling or support from the social worker. Actually, they say no. Or actually, we will say that we encourage they make a phone call to hotline, and but the man will say no. Okay, but very interesting. Most of the cases, over 80% of cases, reported to police for men. Maybe this is the one reason is that before they admitted in the hospital, the case already reported to police. And even they not reported to police, but the men most likely they're willing reported to police. Maybe this is the reason why, because report to police is a crime reporter, and then just to point out you're wrong, my rights, my wife wants. So police, please arrest her. But I don't need social work because I don't need counseling. This is not my fault. Everything all right. So this is also reflect a kind of a culture, gender issue. It's very different. It's very interesting. They're willing to report police, but not seek help. But this is a different presentation. So we will try to explore whether the man is a victim or abuser. Okay. Yes. Okay. But this 54 cases, we find that over more than half in the same time, their spouse admitted to the A&E department. So actually we find that they may not our victim, they may be abuser. They may be fight together, maybe just a victim just because the injury caused by the defense of the women only. So it's interesting, more than half of cases, in the same time they are female, is the same time admitted in the hospital. So according to this finding, some suggestion, I think that the first, we'll find a lot of the gender difference. So for the intervention for the men and women is a very need to, especially if we want to explore, to engage more the men in the process to prevent the domestic violence. Very important to consider the gender difference. And also, for example, just like because if you find that the men actually not likely, you say, to seek help from social worker, to seek help from counseling. So actually, I have another research to have a chance to talk with some men victims. Okay, they will say that they really want to seek some information consultation, but they're not like reading about the counseling. Counseling, they think that is a kind of women work. Right? They will, because I'm not sure this is a Chinese or English difference, but because I talked with some Chinese men, they're willing to say, we're willing to see some information consultation, because the role is not a client, the role is kind of a customer, right? So they're willing to seek consultation, information, rather than counseling. Maybe this is a kind of tips when we want to engage with a man. If you always use the female language, counseling, provide emotional support. Actually, they say that I don't need emotional support. I'm man, I'm emotional okay. Or maybe some social support. No. I think this is very different. Okay, because maybe it is a kind of gender issue. But at the same time, I think when we are working with this case, also we consider the women, whether they are abuser or they are just only, they have a different motivation to using the violence, okay? Or maybe just resist, protect herself, in the same time make the man hurt. So the specific service for men, consider that characteristic, maybe some high-tech. One man also shared with me that maybe use more intellect means because they're willing to search the information through the internet or social media rather than to see the banner or the leaflet. Okay, this is very traditional, right? But the men they like to just looking at the computer and search and to see something. They're willing to do something like that. And also increasing the sensitivity of practitioner for social worker, for the medical professional. It's very important. We understand that the location, the causes of the injury, and how to work with them, identify that. The one point that we find that there are a lot of men, they were injured by the weapon. The weapon is a life. It's a very serious. And actually, we worry about whether it has caused some homicide, very serious family violence cases. And multidisciplinary collaboration is very important. I understand that in my experience, I would think that very important for the different discipline, we need to understand each other, the role, the limitation, and also the duty. For example, when we're working with the doctor and the nurse, I think very important is the A&E department. We cannot just to encourage them, please to patient, please to talk with the kind. I think it's impossible. Because this is an environment, they need to handle a huge number of the cases in the one day. So try to understand and then how to work with them. And I also, one NGO also, to be a consultant, service consultant of one NGO. I think that this NGO experience very good there because this NGO also recruited one legal consultant, is a lawyer, is a lawyer practitioner. So just regularly invite this lawyer to provide staff training to the social worker, make the social worker understanding the work pattern the work habit or pattern or style as a lawyer, and then how to prepare the victim, the abused woman, to talk with lawyer. I think very interesting. The women who go to seek help from the legal advice, they don't know what is meaning of legal advice. Women just only sitting down and then crying and speaking a lot and sharing a lot of emotion word. But lawyer, sorry, no, I ask you the facts. But actually, they don't know what is meaning of facts. They just only and then speak something. The lawyer, actually, I have shared with some lawyers say that the women talk to me over 1 hour, but no point. So I think it's important. Social worker, actually, we work with the abusive woman, need to understand the pattern and how to prepare the victim or how to prepare your client to seek help from different professions. It's very important. If we can make a good preparation for abusive women. And also the women, it's a very sad that when the women see the lawyer and then go back to see the social worker, will always complain, my lawyer, no patience, not willing to listen to me. This is true, right? So I think the expectation is totally different because they expect to see someone and then he or she will provide support. But they another expectation. So they're important. I think the collaboration with each other, understanding how can work together, and then how to fill the gap, and how to make it more easy for our client to good use the different kind of service is very important. I know there's some lawyer that they are willing to help the abusive woman, but they will say that, sorry, I cannot spend whole afternoon, 3 to 4 hours, but I still cannot finish the statement because sometimes to talking something 11 story, but I still listen because I want to provide support. But I think that is important. It's another way. It's a multidisciplinary collaboration. I think it's a group together tries to help the client. So then I hope that this is a start to try to give more different way to approach our client, the family, to help the different party to stop the domestic violence. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that was really, really insightful and actually takes us very nicely into what we're hoping to explore in the discussion part. But I think two things that come out of what you've just said are critical. And that is firstly, in terms of counseling, even in my own sort of sample, I found it's not a Chinese thing per se. I think the parallels you draw in terms of counseling being seen to be feminine is quite interesting. What I found was people thought counseling was a thing for Western people.
Yes, Western.
So the women that I interviewed thought, you must have something mentally unsound about you if you need therapy or counseling. So I think how you package it, it is important in terms of who is going to be open to receiving it, because the last thing you want is to say to your family, oh, I'm going for counseling, and for them to think that there's something wrong with you. So that's really important to bear in mind. The second thing is on the point of lawyers. We have this experience with refugee clients, for example. It's so important to be able to identify how to ask your question so that you can ascertain relevant facts. Yeah. But you see, the client would not know this at all because to her, it's her story. Yeah. And she will start from the beginning and take you through everything to make sure she doesn't miss anything out. And it's about sort of, as you say quite rightly, right, sharing the background in a way that lawyers know what to anticipate with this group of clients so that they know how to draw out the relevant information. And there is a skill which comes, I think, with having a sufficient understanding of how IPV victims may present themselves and to be able to read between or even behind the lines sometimes. So I think those are very, very important messages. But first of all, any questions specifically for Dr. Choi on her presentation?
Yes. I was wondering of the other half. You said that half the group, their partners were also in hospital, and I wondered if there are any characteristics of the other half that would maybe stand out for you.
Actually, I think this is a kind of limitation of the study because just recording, just review the medical chart. So I cannot say that maybe, I'm not sure whether they all is a victim or not. Because sometimes maybe if they are both parties admitted in the A&E department, we still cannot find out the history, actually, right? But and also another half, that means just only the man admitted in the A&E department. It doesn't mean that they just only pure victim, because we don't know what happened in the family. But I think it's very important that if we can identify this man, maybe they're victim, maybe a victim, maybe an abuser, but this is a man in family violence. Maybe another angle for for social worker, for the profession to provide the service to stop no matter which kinds of the intimate partner violence. I think this is very important. If this is a very dangerous thing, that you find that in this case, most number of the cases they use a knife. I think not just only hurt the man, but also it's very common to also hurt the women and also the children in the family. So I will say that I think this is a way for us to understand this characteristic of man, the help-seeking pattern and the injury pattern. I think this is a way for the helping profession to more easy or more enhance the sensitivity to identify whether this is your client, your cases is a potential or has a high risk of these cases. Yeah.
I think there was controversy in Britain when male victims came forward of male victims of intimate partner violence. There's routinely a screening in terms of an assessment of the risk to their partner. And there have been arguments that when female victims come forward, they're not considered potential perpetrators as well. But actually routinely, if male victims present an accident and emergency or social services, they will be screened as perpetrators as well as victims, and the whole family be sort of included.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Jessica.
I would like to know the age of these men patients. For those who may be purely victims, are they older? Because the eldest victims, statistics shows more men are suffered from their violence rather than young men, Young men, they are physically stronger. So I wonder, do you have such information?
Okay, I can show you the information here. Okay. Comparatively, that actually the man is older than women, but not all very old. You find that over 16, just only 6 men. Okay, just only 11%, but most of them is a middle age. Yeah, and you can find 3, there's a 5.6%. This is just only 20 something. Yeah. Okay. But they all is intimate partner violence cases. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. I was actually thinking about violence from another perspective, because I actually got this idea from Dr. Radcliffe's presentation, because I remember in one of your slides, it was a man's account of how the violence happened. He sort of said that because his female partner kept saying something, and then he was sort of overwhelmed, and then he resorted to violence to attack the female partner. So I was thinking, because you also mentioned that women tend to admit their using of their attack to their male partner, while men tend to not to admit, and then saying, no, I'm not actually attacking. So I was thinking, maybe, just my speculation, women tend to use verbal attack on male. So when they use force, actual force, like physical force, so the women will see that they actually have crossed the line, and then that's why they have to admit anyway. But for men, maybe they try to think it in a usual form, like they are just going just a little bit further. So it's not a physical attack. I'm just showing my masculine side. It's just my speculation. So I want to see, I don't know if you have looked into facts like that. And then I have another question is, how far, I'm not sure, but how far can a man use this as a defense? Like, actually my partner was attacking me, verbally, but which is hard to assess. Because maybe, I'm not sure, maybe it will cause some kind of psychological stress on him, and then he was kind of losing control. Is it an effective defense, or how, I'm not sure how the judge will say, because he will probably say, anyway, you have to control yourself, I guess. So, yeah, just a few questions.
Well, I think as a lawyer would tell you, a lot depends and turns obviously on the facts in the case and how good your evidence is and all of that. So we do have a defense of provocation in the law, but that depends on what is the charge. And so there's a threshold. So it's very difficult to say just on very general facts sort of how that would be perceived. Of course, sometimes there is the expectation that you will maintain self-control, but there is in the law room to recognize that there is a certain point after which you may be seen to lose control. And the standard that is typically used is the reasonable man standard. And one of the questions in relation to violence or sustained violence cases pertaining to women has been, when you've been abused over 15, 20 years and you face violence consistently, your reaction to violence will be building on earlier experiences. It's not a one-off instance, whereas provocation is a defense which is very much focused on that one isolated incident. And there have been arguments that, is not appropriate to see incidents as one-off instances, especially in an extended IPV context, where the whole picture tells you a lot more than just, that single incident. But again, some judges are open to seeing it as a process of violence, whereas others say, well, the case before me just concerns this incident because this is the charge. And as you know, charges are based on this date, at this time, this is what happened. And you have to judge the perpetrator on that basis. So it is difficult to say conclusively. Yes?
I think that's very interesting, and very often men do talk about being nagged and goaded and pushed into something, and that very much feeds into particular kind of gendered notion of women as nags. And I think that in some settings you could imagine some judges finding that a legitimate excuse, but otherwise one would hope that they would be able to kind of see through the unreasonable use of force. I mean, most men don't use violence, and we just have to find ways in which to manage that. And it can't be seen as an excuse, I don't think.
Well, just speaking of judges, there was actually a case in the US in the early 80s where a Chinese man who murdered his wife and her lover because he found out about their affair, he argued provocation and sought to have the charge brought down to manslaughter instead of murder. And the judge sympathized with him and gave him a suspended sentence of imprisonment on the basis that in the Chinese culture, it's a huge dishonor and loss of face to have been cheated on by your wife. So I understand, I sympathize that you were provoked into, so obviously that kind of a defense would not fly or be accepted today, and there's grave difficulties with accepting something like that. But I think going to what Dr. Ratcliffe was saying, sort of the perception of the gendered nature of whether an affair would be more of an affront to a man's masculinity, or to sort of frame women as nags, and we know what that feels like, and also depending on who is the judge, who would they be identifying with in court.
Comes back to the neutrality of the law, doesn't it?
It does. So it cuts both ways, though, right? So on the one hand, you need to understand context, but on the other hand, if you take that too far, then you have outcomes which are quite outrageous.
Sorry, this is just a little comment. It was quite interesting when you said that the test that would be used was the reasonable man. Yeah. And I think that says it all. It is actually not neutral.
Well, very much, and that's the other question that's been debated in the law again. So who is your reasonable man? Is it your reasonable man who is also, gay and being provoked about his homosexuality? So what if the circumstance of provocation has nothing to do with that touchy, identity?
But can it be a reasonable woman?
Well, exactly. Well, that hasn't even, featured because, everything that is gendered in the law is considered to be equally referring to the feminine. And singular refers to plural. I mean, we have that in the first ordinance on the books. But very much so. I mean, how would somebody know what's the reasonable woman standard? Is anyone even talking about it? Esther, did you have a question earlier?
I did have a question. The two things that I thought were really interesting was where you said that not many men accepted to have treatment, and then that in 54% of the cases, the partners were also admitted to hospital. And I wondered whether you found any correlation between cases where men refused to have treatment and where their partners were also admitted or were not.
Oh, yes, this is the second step. I would do some analysis because it's just only limited the number because just only 2 years and 5 months data. So actually, I just finished the data collection for 5 years. I hope that with maybe the number of cases more that I can make it. This is the way to do the comparison to what's happened with the man and the female, and then also whether they receive the service or not. Okay, maybe tell you next time.
Yes.
Yeah, I have one query that in your study, whether you have found out that the women get any kind of assault that may be due to the cause of the recurrence of certain incident due to the battered woman syndrome or whatsoever. If the male is victimized because a woman has used the articulation of her anger from last 10, 20 years or the massive abuses that may be verbal as well as mental or the physical. At that time, how do you find it out? The male, either the woman has used the violence due to the massive recurrence of any kind of abuse, or that is just it came into.
Well, again, I mean, so the question is about the battered women syndrome and whether it's accepted as a defense and how do you apply it. Again, that's one of the reasons why, because you can't identify what is her justification and the basis, and it all depends on the case. Not a lot of courts are receptive to it as a defense. So, for example, in Hong Kong, in the Nancy Kissel case, that was one of the arguments made by her lawyers, but the courts in Hong Kong refused to accept that as a valid defense under the law that had been made out on the facts. So even though it's part of the British common law, in that case,
I would like to give a more specialized comment because I'm a criminal barrister and that's my expertise.
Sure.
Okay, for charges of violence, the only possible defense is self-defense. All right? There's no such thing there as reasonable person. I haven't heard of it yet, okay?
No, but that was in context of provocation.
You're talking about murder, which is totally on the opposite side of the spectrum of criminal offenses. All right? So let's just talk about just acts of violence without death. So just acts of violence. So it's on self-defense, and the court will balance the power struggle and the equality or inequality of the attacks that were put into place during the scene of the crime. So it's not because you're male or female, but if somebody slaps you and you hit back in self-defense with a knife, the court will throw out your self-defense because there's no equality there. A slap with a knife, they will throw you out. Now, so that's how the court in Hong Kong does it. It's the equality of the attack. So sometimes a stronger person, normal one, fighting with somebody who cannot even walk or who cannot even run or somebody who's disabled, then if the older person made the attack physical to physical, then highly likely you will be successful with self-defense. And for murder, provocation is a complete defense. And the thing is, with the Kessel case, there's this difficulty of how can verbal abuse of castle by the husband for for having an extramarital affair. Now all of a sudden, I will put poison in your milkshake and knock you down. I mean, it just doesn't work.
But her argument also was that she was sexually abused, and so she's faced physical abuse on occasions in the past.
Yes, but those are her words without any medical evidence. And here, even Kessel doesn't have to say anything. It's the prosecution who will have to prove their evidence beyond reasonable doubt. So judges, if with the prosecution evidence they're already quite sure, whatever the defense will say, it will not work. That's how they do it. They can just reject the whole defense and make a decision based on prosecution evidence, unless it's so overwhelming about the defense. In the Kessel case, they just couldn't. There is this deliberate intention to kill that was pre-planned. So that's why she cannot even get manslaughter. So I just would like to differentiate.
Yeah, I want to add something else. The question of handling the women's issue, it is quite far from the traditional notion of equality that the court should remain in the treated equally, unlikely that the Aristotelian notion. But the one thing
can you speak slower, please, so we can understand?
Yeah, you
strong
can.
Accent going on.
Because the question, as you have put forward, that the Hong Kong court is just following the rule of law, equal protection of law. But one notion what we should take into account is that the question who are being victimized. The one instance, I have just read one newspaper news that the trafficking case has been withdrawn by the police due to the hearing date has been postponed because the particular judge is quite rigorous to the trafficking issue. The question is that how you can think that the equality notion or the rigorous following of the procedure all the time render the justice to or that may help to achieve the criminal justice, particularly barrister.
Well, there's a big issue at the moment. So this refers to Judge Zervos being asked to recuse himself over presiding over the trafficking case that's before him on the argument that he has previously made arguments against the government to strengthen their trafficking regime. And so the question is, how can we only use equality and rule of law as a framework to address issues which clearly do have a gender dimension?
Well, judges are always making judgment based on evidence. And whatever you hear outside of the courtroom is irrelevant. So if you really want to know what's happening with cases, you have to go inside the courtroom and listen inside the courtroom. So sometimes, please don't read newspapers unless a judgment's already been given. But while the trial is going on, everything you read in the newspaper is probably 1% true or less. That's all I can say.
Sorry, I was going to come back to an earlier point, and it was really about the self-defence, because one thing that has certainly happened in the UK in law is that there has been evidence allowed by experts in terms of the impact of domestic abuse, ongoing domestic abuse, in terms of what is seen as proportionate, what is seen as reasonable, and what is seen as possible. Because obviously one of the reasons, if I, as you say, I'm threatened by somebody larger than me, but I pick up a knife and kill him, or I commit serious violence, I don't kill him, but it looked as if I could have walked away, or there's some time period where I could have made a different choice, then traditionally in Britain, that self-defence wouldn't have been accepted. They say, no, there were other choices. And one of the things that has been put forward quite strongly in our courts is that actually, in the context of repeated severe sexual and domestic abuse, it may well be that a person, a woman, and it could be a man, but mostly a woman, feels that they feel that their life is at threat, that there is no other option, that the slow burn, the way of having the poisoning, that could be seen as intentional, but actually it's the only way I can think of managing this. So it's not an immediate response, but it's a response to an ongoing high-level threat. And that's actually been accepted in the courts, so that self-defence is being changed in terms of from quite masculine behaviours to reflect more kind of maybe feminine behaviours, which is where you end up with this kind of interplay between, I suppose, gender, the law, and our knowledge of how abuse affects victims. And it's something that it's a really nuanced argument, though, and it's maybe there's half a dozen, I'd say, barristers across Britain who are really quite linked into that. And they obviously become quite specialist there. And I just wondered, would that fit in Hong Kong?
It has exactly. I mean, Kissel's case really touched on all of these aspects of the slow burn argument, the sexual abuse, and then the verbal abuse, which just preceded her deciding to poison his milkshake and all of that. And the defense barristers did call expert witnesses to talk about battered wife syndrome and the slow burn effect. But on the facts, they were not able to establish that, unfortunately. And so that's how the trial proceeded. But very much in terms of a matter of common law, the Ahluwalia case, which dealt with this issue, whether you can consider provocation from not as an immediate response, but also a response over a certain period of time, that's very much a part of our law. It has yet to be applied in Hong Kong.
And if I may ask, all serious cases of violence will be heard in the High Court by a jury. Mm-hmm. So probably you have a chance if you're in the lower court there's a professional judge sitting. Probably, okay, he can think about these prolonged abuses, mental, psychological, but here you are. It's trial by a jury. They will listen to the case for the first 3, 4, 5 days and make a decision. They're just like you and me. How?
But they are instructed by a judge as to the defence.
Only on the evidence. But as to guilt, it's decided by ordinary people.
Okay. In our courts in Scotland, our judges give a direction as to what self-defence means and what definitions are. I think also in England. So
they also do in Hong Kong, but the application of all those will be done by a jury. And if the jury decided it's guilty, the only way you can appeal is the wrong direction of a judge. You can never appeal against the decision of a jury, never.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I think